the reason why the meta-ethics, the only relevant meta-ethics here, and the meta-ethics is, the meta-ethical doubts you could introduce here is, and people do this, but I can't believe they mean what they think they mean. They'll say things like, well, who's to say that the worst possible misery for everyone is bad?
I mean, does he not realize that there are sadomasochists, there are tyrannical rulers throughout history, there are Satanists, there are sexual creeps, and does he actually think that this doesn't exist? I mean, history is full of people who really get pleasure out of torturing people. And many of those people rise to very powerful positions, right? Roman emperors that like to torture people. Pagan cult leaders that like to do human sacrifice.
Stand so as to form that doubt. Again, I'll just take you to a hot stove and let's have this conversation, right? There's something more fundamental than the intuition you think you have that can motivate that doubt, right?
So, of course, science requires assumptions to get off the ground. The basic intelligibility of the world, some rough correspondence of our sensory data with things that happen.
Did you hear the couple things he's listing? What does that sound like? Presuppositions, assumptions, the things that I talk about all the time. He's listing a few of those. You see, I'm not making this stuff up. It's not word salad. He's saying things you hear me say because this is part of the academic discourse.
So forth. Morality or ethics also require assumptions to get off the ground. The point is that the assumptions you need to get morality off the ground are not a subset of the ones you need to get science off the ground. You're introducing a new assumption that we should avoid the maximum pain for conscious creatures. So
how is that an assumption that is any less fundamental?
I didn't say it was.
Okay.
It's just not science.
But it's not science to say we should understand.
So remember, Harris said that science can give us values. And Carroll is simply saying science has nowhere under its subset this additional proposition that you said that we should avoid maximal suffering. There's nothing in scientific data that tells you that. Sam Harris said, but you touch an oven and your hand goes back. That's not a justification for a not. That's a is. So all he's done is give another state of affairs that this occurs and is acting like that's a justification for why it ought not occur. That's not a justification. You can't keep appealing to things that are the case. It just is. Well, it just is. Yeah, but that doesn't tell us whether it ought not to be or ought to be.
Core of your being as a conscious being will prefer some states over others. That is a fact. That is a fact about you.
Yes.
He keeps confusing a state of affairs, the tendency of beings to flee, with that it ought to be the case as a universal value. And he just can't grasp this, right? They're two different things. Even in his own philosophy and materialistic atheistic worldview, they're two different things. And so he needs to be consistent.
Right? If all we're doing is science, we're describing what happens in the world or what could happen, and we stop. But to do anything about morality, morality is necessarily a set of statements about what we ought to do, what should happen, what is right and wrong. Well, no, and all you need to do is admit one more axiom that we should.
I like this line of argument. So it's like he's saying what moral claims are, statements about ethics, what we should and shouldn't do. And it's like Sam Harris is saying, well, why don't we just redefine ethics to be facts? And then we won't have this problem anymore, right? So how do I avoid Hume's problems about ought from is? Well, I'll just say all the oughts are is. I mean, literally, that's the level of this. It's just mind-boggling, really.
Avoid the greatest suffering, and we can't derive it from what is, and then we can stop talking about meta-ethics and talk about ethics.
First of all, you're not. I don't think you're acknowledging all of the mad work done by people who think that you can't actually make universal claims, realistic claims about right and wrong, good and evil. So it's like I
didn't agree with your axiom.
So did you catch that? You can't make universal claims about ethics and morals. No one can make universal. Sam, that's a universal claim. See, that is precept right there. Listening to the person that you're debating, listening to their argument, taking the phrases, the propositions, and the sentences, just take that sentence. No one can make universal claims. No one can justify or make universal ethical moral claims. That's a universal moral ethical claim.
You admit that it's an axiom.
Well, my claim is that you can get there with just is claims about the situation we're in. We all will have this preference not to burn in fire for eternity, right?
So what?
That's of the nature of what it is to be a conscious being and the difference between burning in fire and not, right? And there are right answers with respect to how to avoid that. So this is just a description of the situation.
Do
we're
I
in.
want to avoid it?
Yes.
Should I?
No, but you want to avoid it, and there's a way to avoid it.
So again, it's a very simple question. The fact that I want to avoid something is not the same thing as that I should avoid something. Two different questions.
Avoid it? Should you avoid it? Should I make other people avoid it?
But the should is derivable from the feeling of how bad.
So oughts are derivable from bad feelings. This is just so inane, right? No, it's not. That's the point. It's an unjustified move. I know you want to derive the ought from the pain, but it's not a justified move. It's a non sequitur. It doesn't follow.
It is to be in fire for eternity.
If we assume that we should avoid the feeling of being in fire for all eternity.
But what I'm saying is that the claim, the question, the place that it seems
would be
like
very liberating for you to just say, yes, we should assume that.
well, but
yeah, I mean, he's just pointing out that your argument is assuming that we ought not be in pain, right? And if Harris would just admit that, that would be a more truthful position to admit that that's what's assumed. But that's what's in question.
I just don't see there's no alternative. Well, like if you actually,
if there's no alternative, then we should certainly do it.
But it's not even an operation. That's what I'm saying. If there's no alternative, the gesture it can't even be made. So if you're actually tracking what is meant by the words, the worst possible misery for everyone, there's no place to stand where you could say, well, should we really avoid that? Maybe we have other priorities. Maybe there's something more important than avoiding the worst possible misery for everyone.
You really don't want to just admit? I mean, I could certainly imagine all sorts of alternative axioms.
Imagine another priority.
We should maximize the suffering of conscious creatures.
But who are we? Who are we in that case?
Yeah, it's like he's missing the point, right? On what basis should I choose, on the one hand, that we should maximize all the suffering versus that we should minimize all the suffering? What is the prior criterion, the delineation problem that's a prior question that tells you one of these is the one you're supposed to choose? On what basis? And here Harris just keeps saying, because it hurts people, because it's bad. Yeah, begging the question. Exactly.
We are among the conscious creatures.
Yeah, we should, yeah. Again, I'm not, that there's an ethical question about whether or not this is the right axiom to choose. But there is a perfectly transparent, logical question about, do we need such an axiom?
Well, no, I think it's interesting. This is one of these conversations where...
There you go. Boom. Eviscerated. Stated in perfectly precise, clear, logical precision that there's really nowhere for Harris to go because he's just been pinned down.
On some level, all you can appeal to are your intuitions about the kind of the meanings of words. Like,
again, how does he know as an empiricist that all you can appeal to is intuitions? I mean, he just throws out these claims, these sort of grand universal states of affairs and propositions which are totally unjustified. So we're granting all that, right? We should be calling out every single sentence this guy says, but to keep it on the same point of just the moral realism and the is-ought question, notice how far down the rabbit hole he's taken us in winding through the labyrinth here, and he's pinned down and there's just nowhere else to go. Because it's stated really clear that these types of claims are one type of claim. These types of claims are another type of claim, and you want to subsume these under these, and it just doesn't work. You can't just redefine all of the oughts as is to avoid the question. Jay, it's been demoralizing watching my fellow MAGA types protest the trampling of the rights of through COOF, but then switch to believing what they see in media. Well, Gay Humian Pumpkin, $3. Sam Harris gets his can't read that one, bro. But interesting. Frankie D, $3. I was too bazed from all of my chalk that they hit me with sanctions. I can only spend $3 plebe dollars. Well, you already spent 20, so sorry that we had to enact sanctions against you, but you're probably a bigot. Morals are obvious, $3. Harris's main argument is an appeal to incredulity. Well, that's a fallacy. He only needs one premise for all the normies to agree that the worst possible misery for everyone is bad. Yeah, but that's arbitrary. It's not a justified statement. If you accept that, which most people do, his moral landscape follows. Everything away from that becomes good. Yeah, but it's unjustified. Remember that they are foundationalists, they are empiricists, and if you're an empiricist, we need empirical sense data to believe his presuppositions. And that is not the one premise. So this is another foolish, kind of basic philosophical mistake. The fact that he lists a first premise as a starting point does not necessarily mean that that's only the first starting point. Because, for example, he's assuming that sentences have meaning, that language works, that it matches up to things in the world. But he hasn't even begun to question that yet. So there's not actually a self-evident brute fact axiom. This has just been so savagely critiqued for centuries in philosophy. It's amazing that people still do this stuff.